Always get that wrong. Welcome to the Audit Committee on the 25th of July, to the members and officers who are here in the chamber and members of the public who are able to access this meeting by live stream. You're very welcome. We hope you find something of interest during the meeting. Agenda item number 1. Tracy, do we have any public questions? And officers who are here in the chamber and members of the public who are able to access this meeting by the stream. Very welcome. We hope you find something of interest during the meeting. Agenda item number 1. Tracy, do we have any public questions?
No public questions.
Thank you, Tracy. Apologies for absence. Okay.
Richard, we have no apologies, but I understand that Councillor Schumann might be a little bit late.
Yes, okay, I think he's coming in from work. Agenda item number 3, declarations of interest. Do I have it? Councillor Kane. I don't know what's happening. Thank you, Jason. We've got kickback on this, haven't we? Agenda item number 3, declarations of interest. I don't know. Is it working? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so then we go to the minutes of the meeting, and we're looking at 2 sets of minutes for the Audit Committee, and I'm looking for agreement to sign the minutes for the meeting held on the Monday the 14th of March. Everybody all right to accept those? I can sign those. Yep, thank you. And the minutes of Thursday, the 19th of May. Everybody okay with that? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Agenda item number 5, which is Chairman's announcements. This is the first quarter of the year's Audit Committee work. Although technically a new committee going forward, I'm pleased that it is in fact a continuation of last year's committee, and that gives us continuity on the issues that we were working on, for example, risk assessment training. As requested, we held a member seminar on risk assessment, which was very useful, and slides and information has been sent to any members unable to attend. In addition, staff training was undertaken with 23 officers attending, including heads of service. Risk assessment will also form part of the new member and staff induction. We are also pursuing our own audit committee effectiveness, and the OGA checklist has been completed in draft and is out for consultation with the members of the committee. When these are returned and collated, we'll be able to determine how to take this forward. You will note that there are some changes to the expected agenda, and I apologise for this. The committee would normally review a draft copy of the AGS at its July meeting, with a final version coming in the autumn for approval. This is at the same time as the statement of accounts. From the papers in front of you, the committee will be aware that the statement of accounts will not now be presented to the committee for approval until March 2023. As you can imagine, this is deeply frustrating. That this is the current situation. I'm sure our external auditor, Mark Hodgson, who we welcome to the meeting, will explain why this is the case. As the AGS needs to be approved at the same time as the statement of accounts and needs to reflect any known significant changes between the 31st of March 2022 and the date it is approved, it is considered too early for this to be presented to the committee at this time. The statement will come instead to the next meeting of the committee in the autumn. You will note that the committee agenda plan has been updated to reflect this change. We do have at this meeting the internal audit report and opinion for 21-22, and the results from this report were reflected in the AGS when it's finalised. So I also welcome Rachel Ashley-Comte, the Chief Internal Auditor, to the meeting for agenda item number 7. One other issue which we may be discussing is the possible movement of the November meeting to October. It doesn't affect the content of availability of papers as it stands for the forward plan, but better spaces out the meetings. But we'll look at that at the end of this meeting. Right, so if I could now go to agenda item number 6. This is a report for noting. and will be delivered by our external auditor. May I say to councillors, thank you very much for sending your questions in. That's really, really helpful in advance. And we'll be looking at those, but I suspect that you, what I would like to know is whether or not the questions that you sent in were, whether you had supplementary questions that you might like to ask. Yeah, I guess that was the case. So I'll pass this over to our external auditor, who will just present the report, and then we can look at the questions.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. So in presenting our audit plan, just pull out some highlights because the format of the plan is the same as this committee has seen previously, and indeed the risk profile of the audit is very similar to the previous year, which should be reassuring news to you as a committee. So the key highlights are that we're working to a materiality level of £750,000 for the single entity council set of accounts, reporting any audit differences above 38,000 to you, and a very similar number for the group accounts, so 800,000, and reporting any audit adjustments above 40,000 to you. This is currently based on the last available set of audited accounts, which is clearly last year's, but will be updated when we get the draft sets of accounts through. In terms of the risk profile on page 5 and 6, as I said, very stable from the prior year. Risks and indeed their designation between fraud risk, significant risk and inherent risk. We have included one new significant risk only in relation to the implementation of the new fixed asset register, given that it does drive material balances on the balance sheet. So we do need to gain assurance over the transfer of data, the opening balances within the system, the parameters set up correctly to enable the accounting policies that the council has to be implemented and working as intended, and indeed then checking clearly the flow of accounts from that new system into the ledger and therefore the financial statements. As I said, all other risks are consistent, but happy to take any questions if any members has them afterwards, but not only consistent year on year for you, but equally consistent with other councils of a similar nature. Again, should give you some reassurance as a committee. In terms of our group audit, we have two full scope audits, which are the single entity council accounts and East Cambridgeshire trading, and then one specific scope audit, East Cambridgeshire street scene, which is exactly the same as the prior year as well. And we have now issued our group instructions to Price Bailey as the component auditor for the subsidiaries. Equally, the audit team is consistent with the prior year and would be happy to take any questions that any members have on any of the detail.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Kane submitted 7 questions. Thank you for that. And you said that you had further clarification that you wanted on some of these questions. So please feel free. Anybody else has wanted to ask questions? Oh, okay, that's fine. So Councillor Kane. Thank you.
Is that annoying everybody?
No, it's just yours. Okay, shift along one. Thank you.
I didn't really get an answer to why it's going to take so long, but I see further down in my questions, it does explain that it's a widespread national issue, which I just would like to note seems to get worse and worse each year. I am deeply unhappy with not providing audited accounts to our residents until a year after the year that we're presenting. So I guess my question is, how do we get out of this? How do we get to a point where we've got a set of draft accounts in July and a fully audited set ready to post on the website by the deadline set by government?
Would like to pick that up, Ian or Mark?
I can start, and I think that question is one that is in the remit of the new Director of Audit at the Audit Regulation Authority, ARGA, who are an off branch of the Financial Reporting Council. I think that's number one on their to-do list when they come into post from the 1st of September, because as we said in the answers, it is a national issue impacting the sector, and clearly any other audits that slip beyond where they are now has a bigger impact on the timeline going forward. So that is being addressed there.
Thank you. It's worrying if he doesn't come into post in September, suggests he won't have put significant change in for next year either. And then more an internal question. So we've got to publish a draft set of accounts by the end of next week. Why hasn't this committee, I know we have, it's not audited, but why have we not got a copy of those draft accounts?
Historically, this council has not brought a copy of its draft accounts to Audit Committee, or prior to that, Finance and Assets Committee, and so therefore we've continued with that that arrangement. Now, clearly, if Audit Committee wanted to change that arrangement and have a draft version in advance of the publication of that, we could facilitate that in future years.
Chair, I think at least until we've got the proper audit on a proper timetable, that's at least we have something in front of us before it's published, so that we have a chance to have a look at it. I'm concerned about ECTC and ECSS because we had understood from their managing director that we were going to get, that the audited accounts would be provided in a timely manner, and we're now told they won't actually be available till September. We were also told that we were going to get a timeline for it, and I don't recollect seeing one. I'd like to understand why it is that they haven't, as agreed, brought their timetable forward, so that our Section 151 officer can have the accounts in a timely way to do the group accounts. Is it group accounts you have to publish at the end of July?
We have to publish all the accounts at the end of July,
Yeah.
that includes, which would include the group accounts. But picking up your question through the chair, we have historically, again, produced our draft accounts based on the accounts of ECSS and ECTC, which are presented to their auditors. Their draft accounts equally, I mean, clearly, if through their audit process, if there are amendments made, we can make those to our accounts well in advance of the timetable which is required by EU for EY, sorry, in relation to the final accounts of final sign-off of the group accounts.
But Chair, that isn't the timetable we were expecting to comply with, and I really would like this committee to ask the managing director of ECTC and ECSS to explain why the timetable wasn't brought forward, because we did have an undertaking to that effect. But just before we go on from that, I did notice that external audit said that they've now issued their instructions to the auditors of the trading companies. Is that part of the delay, that they didn't have the instructions? No.
Thank you. Let me just pick up what Councillor Kane said. Can we take that out of the meeting, Ian, and ask for that could be emailed so that we have the answer to that? As for the slippage we're talking about.
And then my other question is, what is the accounts production timetable? So you've said the draft statement will be published in July. Is that the end of the timetable? Because there's presumably other work to do as the accounts are audited.
Yeah, we published the draft accounts at the end of July, which will be Friday, and to be honest, little work will be done then until audit come in the start of January to do the audit work. There'll be some communications between ourselves and EY during that period where we'll be providing them with some initial information, but the bulk of the work on the audit is going to take place in January. And so therefore, while there'll be a certain amount of communication between ourselves and EY during that period, it will be relatively limited. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
So we're going to get the ECTC and ECSS audit accounts in September. When are you timetabling to review the impact that has on the group accounting?
Well, that will be tweaking between EY coming in January and the draft accounts which have been published. But we haven't got an exact timescale for that, but clearly there is quite a large window of space there which you can use.
So the accounts that are posted on the website in July, they stay as they are until we post the audited accounts. So it would be useful for this committee to see a set of accounts in November, which would include any changes arising as a result of having the trading company audited accounts.
That does cause difficult, and theoretically that's possible, but that does cause difficulty in so much that the audit EY will undertake will be will audit the accounts, the draft accounts which we publish at the end of July. And so therefore, if we start making various versions between the version at the end of July and the January one, that does cause complications in the audit.
So if there were any adjustments needed as a result of getting the trading company's audited accounts, you wouldn't action those until the auditors had finished their work?
Again, through the chair, we would clearly make audit aware of those changes and we discuss them with the auditors, but we wouldn't particularly want to get various versions of the statement of accounts in the public domain when the audit is responsible for auditing, as I said, the accounts which we publish at the end of July.
So would it be possible instead to bring us a paper discussing the implications, if any, from the audited accounts of the trading companies for the group accounts?
Going through the chair, that wouldn't necessarily be a problem.
In which case, Chair, I'd very much like to see that at November's meeting.
And also, it's also picked up, we'll pick that up in a minute, but also pick up the fact that actually going forward, this committee would like to see the draft accounts normally before they go up on the website. I mean, everybody has the opportunity to respond to the draft accounts, but we haven't had the opportunity to look at it as a committee, and I think that's something we should do. Councillor Sharp, what did you want to say?
Thank you, Chair.
Have all your questions now been asked?
Some of them are, but I just want to maybe slightly tweak them and not necessarily in any order. I would welcome a set of accounts in November because I find I'm not happy or not content, shall we say, that the first time this committee formally sees a set of accounts for the year ended at March is March next year. That to me doesn't seem right. And I can understand Ian's wish that he doesn't want multiple versions, but I don't know, and I'm not trying to do his job for him, but I would have thought if as I understand it, the accounts at the moment include the draft accounts from ECTC and ECSS. And if there are any material adjustments that the auditors have made, I would have thought the easiest thing is to do those straight away because EY, when they're coming in, will want to see what adjustments have been put through. So I'm not trying to, but that's it. Well,
Sorry, can I just drill down on what you just said? Because
Pardon?
I'm not sure what you've got. So the paper that's suggested that council can agree to for coming in November, the paper coming in November, would that satisfy what you were suggesting? Or were you suggesting
That's a
something
backstop if we can't have the accounts. I think we're both in agreement.
agreement?
I think we're both in agreement that we should have the accounts, but if we really can't,
Then we'd have
then
the
that
paper
would be a backstop.
for
Yeah.
November. That might have some implications for not moving the meeting from November to October, which is something that we were just going to discuss. So,
if I can come back in terms of, obviously, and I'm going to go on to EY in a minute, but in terms of the timetable, in previous years, we've had the committee has met in November to look at the final, hopefully the final audited version of the accounts. Now, if the audit's not going to start till next year, then I wouldn't have thought we need to wait. We could have a meeting in October, because I wouldn't have thought there's going to be much. And again, I don't take this wrong way. There's not going to be much for Ian to do on the accounts from when the draft is produced at the end of July until the audit starts. So I can't see it stopping us having possibly moving the November meeting forward to October. That would be my first comment. Whereas normally, obviously, if you're rushing to get the audit, not rushing, but you know, everybody knows the pressure just before the sign off of an audit, then the deadline's always tight. So I wouldn't have thought that's going to affect us moving forward the meeting personally. Others may
well,
disagree.
we can make a final decision when we look at the forward agenda.
But it's really going back to obviously the movement in deadlines. And I spent a fair bit of yesterday trawling around the internet, looking at the PSAA website and everything else, trying to see if I'd missed something in terms of the movement of the statutory deadline for the accounts, which I think is still November 22. Because I thought, oh, the government have actually done something to move those dates. I understand the logistical pressures, that's not the right word, but the pressures you've got in terms of staffing. But what it does, it doesn't, I don't think it shows the accounts in a very good light if we're not able to publish our audited accounts till the end, end of March next year. And that's where I'm coming from, is that it's obviously a national issue, but it's I don't feel comfortable saying to residents, oh, we haven't produced our audited accounts because of a staffing issue. Admittedly, it's an external staffing issue, but that's what. So is most other audit firms are in the same boat basically, or yeah. I mean, you might not be able to answer for those, Mark. I understand that, but
So I can give you the context.
Yeah.
So clearly, audit and account regulations require a council, as Ian said, to publish their draft accounts by the 31st of July. So that is the opportunity for residents to look at the accounts that have been prepared for the financial year under review. Clearly, having an audit opinion to say they are correct is desirable by a point in time, which is what the 30th of November publication date is aimed to do. But clearly, an audit can only happen when sufficient resources are available to do it. Only 9% of audits nationally last year were signed off by the 30th of November deadline that was available to all auditors last year. And clearly, if you're on a 12-month rolling window without additional resources, it's going to be a very similar picture. All audit firms and PSAA and National Audit Office fully understand it's difficult for members when you're trying to have discussions with residents about council accounts, and totally acknowledge that, but can't move away from the fact you have to have, well, with a finite number of people who can audit them and a timetable that only has 365 days of the year in it, give or take, then you're on a very tight timeline. It goes back to Councillor Kane's question about how can the regulator and the sector make changes to unhinge a year-on-year current issue.
If I may say, I think it's really important that our minutes demonstrate that we will be publishing our draft accounts when we should, and that any delay in our final accounts, our statement of accounts, is not to do with us, but is to do through external auditor resource issues, which is a national problem, and we're not pushing you, Mark, any further than anybody else can push you on that. But I think we need to make it absolutely clear that we've done our bit and that we are held up because of national issues. It's a shame, really, because every year we've got our accounts out on time and we've done what we should do, and it's a shame that other people are behind, and that has a knock-on effect on us. Any other questions?
No, not at this stage, I don't think.
Councillor Insip, you didn't put in any questions for that. Do you want to? Okay, that's absolutely fine. So if there are no more questions, this agenda item is for noting. So I can say that it has been duly noted. Thank you very much. And Mark, thank you very much for coming. So we move on to agenda item number 7. And agenda item 7 is to report on the work of the internal audit and the annual option for 21-22. I would just remind our members that we do have a matter of exempt papers, and I was just considering. Oh, 89. Ahead of myself. Sorry, really, really sorry. Okay, so so now we're just asking Rachel, please, to go through the internal audit report and for questions to be raised as per ones that have come in.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the annual internal audit report and opinion for the financial year 21-22. So I'll just take members through the key sections of the report, and then I'll be happy to take any questions. So ultimately, this is the culmination of all of the work that we've delivered for you during the last financial year. It's what we deliver the audit plan for, to inform this overall opinion on the governance, risk and control framework. And this should ultimately then provide you with one of your sources of assurance that you rely upon in producing your annual governance statement. So as has already been mentioned today, I would expect this to be factored into that document when that comes for your review. So my opinion is provided in section 2 of the report on page 3. So I've just talked through here the overall assurance opinion on the governance, risk and control framework for the year and some of the key considerations in terms of those relevant areas. So overall, I have given an opinion of satisfactory assurance, and that's in line with the definitions that the committee is accustomed to receiving, and is also provided in section 4 of the report where you've got the definition there. So it ultimately reflects the fact that there are some areas of risk that we have identified. We have identified some areas for improvement. We have also had a number of audits that have received the highest level of assurance and substantial assurance overall. But on balance, we've given that mid-range assurance opinion, which is consistent with previous years at the council. And is also consistent with some comparable authorities that I work with as well within our shared service. So within some of the sections, I have recognised some specific areas that have been highlighted throughout the year, including the IT outages report that the committee considered, and also some of the overdue audit recommendations, which is also an area for assurance for me, where I consider if officers are taking prompt action to address the issues we've identified, that gives me further sources of assurance as well. So that's detailed further within the report. So the rest of the report really sets out the basis for that audit opinion. So the table 1 on page 4 sets out the overall assurance opinions that have resulted from the audits. As you can see, as a comparator to the previous year, we've actually had a higher number of substantial assurance opinions and a lower number of satisfactory. But we would expect this to fluctuate a little bit because of the nature of internal audit, that we are risk-based. We are focusing on the council's key areas of risk. We're not looking at the same systems year in, year out. So there is likely to be some movement there, but it's reassuring that it's a similar pattern. We've also, as the committee will be aware, we've obviously reported to you throughout the financial year on the outcomes of audits as they've been completed. So a number of those have already been summarised as part of progress reporting. But in table 3, I've provided you with all of the audit assignments from the plan and the outcomes of each of those, including the date that it was reported to the committee, including those which have been finalised since the last meeting. For completeness, I have also provided you with the executive summaries, which I would usually provide in a progress report for any of those which have been finalised since the last meeting. And these are all provided in Appendix A to this report at the end of the papers. So we've also commented on the implementation of audit recommendations, as I said. So again, where we identified areas for improvement. So if there's an action plan in place, we've considered that and the action that's been taken to address that. So table 4 provides a summary of those. As you'll see, a number of the actions are not yet due for implementation, or were not due at the time of producing this report at the end of March, which isn't unusual. Obviously, we're making a number of recommendations throughout the year, and some of those will not have become due. We had one that was overdue, and we've got 5 that we had confirmed was implemented. And as I've provided in table 5, I've given you a full overview of overdue audit recommendations. So the committee will note, in addition to the one that was overdue from the current year's financial audit, current year's audits for 21-22, there were also 4 actions that remained overdue from a previous financial year. So I provided you with a list of those in table 5 of the report. Members will also note there's a further update on those actions which remained overdue in the next agenda item as well. So I won't go into those further. The rest of the report sets out some of the performance of the internal audit team, the contribution that we've made throughout the year, and our assessment against standards and our performance indicators. So I'm pleased to confirm that we delivered 100% of the internal audit plan, and all of our delegated audits have been completed by the end of March as per our agreement, which actually exceeds our target of 90%. We actually achieved 100% delivery by the end of March. So I'm pleased to be able to share those reports with you today. Also included within the appendices is the executive summaries, or a key summary really of the findings of the ARP audits which we receive in relation to the shared revenues and benefits service. So they are provided as Appendix C to the report as well for members' information. So that's a quick run through of the report, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we had written questions in advance from Councillor Inskip and Councillor Kane. Shall we start with Councillor Inskip?
Yeah, well, I've got to follow up on my first question. So if I understood the answer correctly, we're saying there is enough capacity in the IT team to deal with the overdue recommendations. Could you clarify? I don't know who's best to answer this, because I think this is where we probably need an officer from IT. But can we clarify then, if we have enough capacity to deal with them in a timely manner, why we're not dealing with them in a timely manner?
Clearly, there are these issues go back a number of months, in perhaps years on one of them. But
sorry, I can't hear the answer.
Sorry, I mean, clearly some of these issues go back a number of months, and you know, perhaps they haven't been given the priority in the IT team, which they should have done. But as you'll be aware, that I'm now director in charge of IT, and I will be pushing and changing the priorities of the team to ensure that these do happen in a timely way.
Okay, Councillor Inskip.
Well, I guess we'll see. Do we then have, for those items that are still open, do we know when we can now expect them to be closed, or is that something you still need to agree with the IT team?
I mean, just as an example, I won't discuss exactly what we're talking about because it's on the exempt appendix. Like the third issue on the exempt appendix will now be taken. We've got the date for that finalised, and that will be taking place the weekend of the 17th and 18th of September. Sorry, I didn't have a mic.
Okay, yeah, I guess what concerns me there is because we have overdue actions on, and I know they're on blue papers, and the answer to my next question was that they're there because they relate to cybersecurity. What concerns me there is we've got some actions that were agreed many months ago from an audit that we need to address. In the meantime, we had a guidance only a few weeks ago from the National Cybersecurity Centre saying we're now in an extended period of heightened threat, and it's advising all organisations to take additional steps, and we haven't even addressed those fundamental steps that were identified from the audit. I suspect, and maybe this isn't the right place to ask that question, but I suspect if we haven't closed those actions, we haven't even started to look at the latest NCSC guidance and responded to that.
not in a position to answer that question.
Is this something that we could actually bring back, that perhaps we could get an answer outside this meeting, bearing in mind Councillor Lidcott's first point, but also the second point about the enhanced information that you've received? If that will give you an opportunity to have a look at what all that is, and then we could email that round, that would be, if that's okay. Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to come in on, if I can
on
add to
that
what,
one, yeah, okay,
on that
fine,
point.
thank you, yeah.
I think it's important we do get a paper back because, yes, we've had, I mean, as probably most members know, my council email account was hacked and people got silly emails from me. Well, they probably get that normally, but being serious, there were spurious emails for a few months ago. So, yeah, I think it's important we get a report back. Yeah.
So if we can note that that is really important for members to actually get that information as soon as we can. Okay.
It's on the same point. I see from the risk register that those improvements are due to be implemented by the end of July. So could we have an update just by email at the beginning of August, just confirming that they have been implemented, and if not, what the revised timetable is?
Yeah, am I right in thinking that this is reported to F&A committee? So has this IT comes under finance, comes under the policy committee, yeah. Finance and assets.
I mean, as committee have requested an update on this, I'm happy to provide an update in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, okay, because I think it's important, because although we're dealing with governance here, this is really important, and that obviously policy committees where the operational information is, I think we are all sufficiently concerned that we have this information. Okay. Is that your questions done, Councillor Inskip? And so we're on to Councillor Kane, who has several.
Yeah, but I'm not going to follow up on all of them.
But Rachel's seen them, so okay.
I would just like to start by saying thank you, because there's obviously a significant amount of work has gone into this, and it is reassuring to know that things are being checked, improvements suggested, and the implementation is being monitored. So that brings me to the financial control. So your first testing found that we weren't consistently following the approvals process for payments over 50,000. And then changes were put in place, and you went back and checked and still found that nearly half of them weren't properly authorised. And when I've questioned that, I've been told the operational procedure notes have been updated and staff have been trained in the new procedures. So is that since the internal audit follow-up testing?
The procedure notes were updated prior to, after the first recommendation. The training took place of, in relation to training, the answer is both. Was at the time, but further training has been provided since that time, since the follow-up.
So are you satisfied now that everybody should understand the procedures? Is now a good time for internal audit to come and retest?
I am comfortable that we now have robust processes in place. Yes, I mean, I'm sure that Rachel will pick up and review this situation as part of her routine audit this year, rather than a specific. Clearly, that's within her remit to decide when she reevaluates our progress on this.
So, sorry, Rachel, presumably you are intending to go and retest at some point this year?
Yes, through you, Chair. Yes, I would look to follow this up, certainly as part of this year's audit, but I was hoping potentially to do something in the interim as well, just so that we're not waiting until year end to get that assurance. So I'll be looking to do something sooner to make sure that things are ticking along as we'd expect. So hopefully I can report back to the committee on that basis.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, on the procurement compliant, I asked how many have attended the training and how many are waiting. You've answered how many have attended. How many are still awaiting the training?
I mean, we don't have a waiting list as such. We run the procurement training every 12 months, and potentially we could run it more frequently than that, but historically we've run it every 12 months. And the audit recommendation was that all service leads should have the training at least every 3 years. And unfortunately, I haven't got records for 3 years ago, but I will be making sure that those who haven't attended either this year or last year will be attending next year.
So now you've run the training last month, are you happy at least that everyone, every relevant officer has had the training, albeit you don't know how long ago?
As I said, I haven't got lists prior to the training that took place last year, so I can't confirm that. If I can say, the person whom we felt was most in need of that training has definitely now had that.
Could I just ask a supplementary on the same thing? I was just wondering, to what extent is this training, because all the way through we are talking about training not only for members, but talking about it for members of staff. It's a recurring statement, whether, you know, how mandatory is a training session for a relevant officer, and how do you sort of manage to ensure that they are all getting the training that's required, or is it just open to officers to choose to do it?
Training, I mean, clearly everybody goes through induction training at the start of their career at East Cambridge District Council, and so therefore that is compulsory. Most of the training is at the officer's discretion. Clearly, there was a recommendation in relation to procurement training in an audit report last year that line managers should go every 3 years. So we'll be using that to ensure that that does take place.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Kane.
So no, it's I'm sharing what I pick up is a concern you have. So do we have a sort of central record of the key training that staff have been on and when, like health and safety, like finance, procedures, so forth?
I'm not in a position to answer that question. Clearly, I've kept records myself of finance training courses over the last 2 or 3 years, but what other service lead managers hold, I can comment on. Again, I can go away and find that out.
I'm quite worried about this. Would it be possible, Chair, to have a paper to our next meeting about how training is managed at the council? Most places I've worked, there's been HR have kept some sort of central record of the training people have been on, so that it's very easy to tell that, you know, if they're doing a recruitment, they've had the relevant equalities training and recruitment training. If they're involved in finance, they've had the relevant finance training. If we haven't got that, then it's more a surprise that internal audit finds that procedures are ever followed, let alone finds that they're quite frequently not followed. So I think training is so critical. We can have all the policies and procedures we like. If staff don't know what they are and how to follow them, then they won't be followed. Sorry, Rachel.
Sorry, Chair, I just thought it might be worth adding, obviously I'm not able to respond on behalf of council as to how the central records are maintained, but I do have some knowledge of, Councillor Kane mentioned things like health and safety training. So when we did the health and safety audit, we found there was a training log for all of those training items. So that included things like first aid training, fire warden training, fire extinguisher training, bomb threat, suspicious package training. So there is a log of those, so we can confirm that. But as to the other wider training, I don't know. We haven't covered that recently. So hopefully that just gives a little bit of insight.
I think from the governance perspective, it would be useful for us to know what the procedures are to ensure that staff are trained to be able to carry out their own. Is it possible to bring a paper or circulate between now and then the information that we have? Because obviously you can do finance, there aren't that many departments that we just need to get to understand how they manage to register, ensure that staff are fully trained within the timescale.
Yeah, I mean, Rachel mentioned a number of training courses, and I know in legal they keep a register of who's done data protection training, things like that. But yeah, I'm happy to prepare a paper for the next committee meeting. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think it would be, I absolutely in agreement about training, how important that is. And after all, the same applies to members as well, to make sure that actually we keep a register of the training that members have attended or not, because it's all about being fully equipped to do the job you're doing, isn't it? So that's great. I'm not asking you to do the members one, just the staff. Councillor Kane, did you have other questions? Okay, I'd like to add my thanks to Rachel. Well, she's going to do the next agenda item anyway, but it's good that Councillor Kane couldn't find much more to question you about, which is really great. Thank you very much indeed. So,
I don't know whether it's this one or the internal audit progress report, but I found the rolling risk review report very helpful, and I would quite like A2 to be the next risk that is reviewed under that rolling program.
okay, that's
So I don't know if that's this agenda item or the next one.
Yeah, that was something you offered us, isn't it? That we yes, next agenda item. So agenda item 7, we're asked that the committee considers and notes the internal audit report and opinion for 2021-22. I think we've done that, so we can move on, Rachel, to the next agenda item, which is yours. Then I'll ask the question about the exempt payment. Is there anything we don't want to go into committee unless we absolutely have to, because it excludes our residents and we don't want that to happen? So if there are no pertinent questions, if there are no questions that are likely to be asked, if there are, that's absolutely fine. But if there aren't, then we would not need to go into exempt session, provided we don't ask questions that would which we would consider to be a risk. Council, is everybody happy not to do that? If you do it, I'll tell you. Okay, so that means we don't have to go. I think Annalise is quite relieved she's not going to have to do this. So this next paper, which Rachel's going to do, which has also got some questions on it, we're looking to advise the members of the work of the Internal Audit Committee 2022-23 financial year to date, and the progress against the Internal Audit Plan. So this is only a few months on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our first progress and performance update for the new financial year. So members of the committee will be familiar with the format and the content, but I'll just take you through some of the key areas of the report. So as at the time of reporting, we have already finalised one audit from the audit plan. So that's summarised for you in section 2.3, where we've provided the executive summary. So this audit was in relation to assets of community value. So this was something that we'd included in the audit plan, not because it posed a particular risk at this time, but because it was an area of compliance relating to regulatory compliance, which links to the risk register. But it's an area that hadn't been subject to any audit since the new legislation came into force in 2012. So I wanted us to give a review on this and give the committee some assurance over compliance. So I'm pleased to report that we've given a good level of assurance overall for the design of the controls and the compliance based on reviews of recent cases. We have recommended that the protocol be reviewed as it was last revised in July 2015. So there's a recommendation there, which is why we've given good overall for the control environment just in pending that review. But based on the testing that was conducted, everything was in compliance with the expected controls, and we had no areas that I needed to highlight to the committee as areas of weakness for your attention. So hopefully that gives some assurance over that risk area. Also, as has already been alluded to today, I've also presented for you the first of our real-time risk assurances. So as I proposed to the committee as part of our development of this year's internal audit plan, what I really want internal audit to do is to give a good level of assurance around risk management and make it really clear what our role is in terms of risk management, in that we are not involved in the management of risk and we do not produce the content of your risk registers, but we are here to provide assurance over how those risks are being managed on an active basis. So in line with that, we selected our first risk for review, which was C1 from the risk register. And the reason I selected this one was because there was a very big difference on this one between the inherent risk and the residual risk. And that really means that the controls in that area are crucial, because we're relying on them to take us from a high risk to a low risk overall. So based on that basis, we reviewed all of the controls. We've also looked at the risk entry as well and discuss that with the risk lead to make sure that it continues to reflect the current environment and any areas for update. And what I've done is provided you with an overview in table 5 of the work that we produced. So it's going through each of those key controls that have been reported to the committee on the register and where we've tested what we found. So we've been told that we have a business continuity plan that's updated and it's in place. We've confirmed that is correct. We've received a copy and confirmed the next review date as well. So that's just as an example. And we've also then tried to give you a RAG rating in terms of each of those controls as to how we think it is in place and whether it's partially in place or whether it's fully operational. So I would welcome any feedback from the committee to make sure that this is meeting your needs, because it really is intended to give you some support in making sure you're getting the right level of assurance over risk management. I was also going to ask whether you wanted to suggest any areas for us to look at during this year to focus on those rolling reviews. We are currently undertaking already the next of the reviews. We just completed it and we're going through the clearance on the findings at the moment in relation to the risk around GDPR compliance. So I selected that as the second risk. We've just concluded that work, so that will come to the next audit committee meeting. And as I say, we'll continue to report on these throughout the year to give you that real-time assurance. But I'm happy to take any feedback on how we've presented that for you if you have any comments. So otherwise, there is a copy of the internal audit plan provided for you in table 1 on pages 5 and 6. So this sets out the status of each of those assignments as at the time of reporting. Members will note that we are looking to make a start on our key financial systems audits earlier than we usually would. So the bank reconciliation, creditors, etc., we would usually do in Q4, mindful of the fact that external audit will be in Q4, which is not standard. I've looked to bring those forward so as not to put too much pressure on the finance team. So we're trying to work around that. So I just wanted the committee to be aware that's a slight change to how we'd normally perform those audits. We've also, since this was produced, we've also started planning work on the enforcement policy compliance review and noted the feedback from the committee as part of the audit planning around speaking to parish councils, so that will feed into the scope. And we'll obviously report back to you at the next meeting on the next progress that we've made since this meeting. So also just to mention in terms of the implementation of audit recommendations, at the time of reporting in June, we did have 6 recommendations which were overdue. 5 of those were over 3 months overdue, and as we've mentioned, obviously some of this is in the exempt appendices due to the nature of the actions, but you have got details of all of those high or medium actions which are over 3 months overdue with the latest comments we've received from officers. We'll obviously continue to follow those up as well during the financial year and report back. So that's a run through of where we are, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Inskip, you sent in a written question. Are you happy with the answer? We only have one written question, that was from you. Has that been dealt with already? Well,
I obviously know what the answer is, but I guess I'm still concerned because this was in relation to an action that was due to be completed by the 31st of March. There's an update given as to what happened in June. We're now saying that there will be a report at the end of August, and so presumably at the earliest it would now get closed in September. So again, I guess there's a continuing theme here that we've got lots of a whole series of actions on the IT department which just seem to be drifting and taking a very long time to close. So, you know, the answer is what it is, but as I say, it just raises concerns with me about the why we're being so slow to close these actions that we're identifying and missing so much the target dates that have been agreed.
So you need that reinforced in the minutes. Sorry, did you hear what I said? I said we need to reinforce our concerns in the minutes. Did you have any other additional questions that you wanted while we're with you, Councillor Skip?
I just picking up actually on Appendix 5. And again, it's an ICT one, but we talk about disaster recovery plan. A couple of questions. So, because it says that an ICT disaster recovery plan was developed in January 2021. So does that mean we didn't have one before? Is this the first time we've had a DLP for ICT? I guess that is the first question. And the second one is, given that we're now sort of 18 months, 19 months nearly down the line, when are we expecting to test that to see whether it actually does what we expect it to do?
That question to Ian. Rather than Rachel. Did you get all that? I couldn't hear it very well. So could you just?
You talked about Appendix 5.
Yeah. So it's where it talks about the review of the controls and the assurance and the findings. So C1.6, and it mentions there in the second paragraph. Well, in the second paragraph it says an ICT disaster recovery plan was developed. And in the third paragraph, it talks about it's currently being reviewed and updated if necessary. I'm just trying to understand whether it's new and whether we didn't have one before January 2021, and the implication that it's being reviewed as a testing plan is also being drawn up implies at least that it hasn't been tested yet.
I can't comment about what we had before or after January 21, but my answer earlier when I referred to the third question on the exempt papers is actually the answer to the second bullet point here.
Did you have another question, Councillor Skip? Was that? Sorry, did you have another question? Was that?
No.
No. So, before I go to Councillor Kane, Councillor Sharp, do you have a question? No. So, Councillor Kane indicated that she wanted to talk about the rolling review of controls, and I just wondered whether you wanted to
yes,
bring that up now.
Sorry, I jumped an item.
No, that's fine.
So, in answer to your question, I find the table really helpful. Because it's gone through the mitigating controls, and we can now have comfort that for this risk, the mitigating controls are there and are operating, subject to, as Councillor Inskip just picked up, there could be some further improvements, but I find it really useful, and it allows us to ask questions about specific areas. So yeah, I think it's good. So thank you very much. I find that useful.
Well, Rachel asked us whether or not it was what we needed, and if we had any feedback for her that would help her as a collaborative approach on this. So does anybody want to make any comment to Rachel about, ways forward that it's not included, or is this something that's ongoing that we'll be able to suggest to Rachel? Is it doing what, because Rachel, last time we talked about how we needed this, didn't we? And how it was up to us to say what we needed and how we needed to do it. So anything further you'd like to say, or are you happy with what's happening? I mean, so you've obviously said you like it.
I think it's useful. I think it's nice and clearly set out.
Okay. Are you happy with that feedback? We're really happy with that. So any more questions from anybody on that? No, so we are being asked to note the progress made by the internal audit and the delivery of the audit plan and the key findings. I think we've done that, so thank you very much indeed, Rachel, for that. And now we move on to agenda item 10, which is to provide members with a copy of the latest corporate risk register. Sorry? Oh, sorry, going too quickly. As you were, agenda item number 9. Okay, this is about the provision of internal audit service. And you, just to put it into context, you will remember that we discussed this some time ago, and that we decided that we wanted an option paper, which would be brought to us by the Chief Executive. And originally that was for 2023. And then it was agreed that this would be 2024. So what I asked for was an interim paper, just rather than it just to be allowed to slip. So this is what Ian has produced in answer to that, to keep us up to date with what's happening. And I think Councillor Kane, you did ask some questions on this. Right, this is item number 9. So were you happy with the written questions that you asked? You asked 3, with the answers rather that you had?
I don't want to come back on the specific questions, but I do want to make some comments.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
So I'm very disappointed by this paper, with respect, by the fact that it's presented by the finance manager when we asked the chief executive to bring us a paper. We did have a long discussion. There were lots of questions that were not able to be answered at the meeting, which I had hoped would be answered in this scoping paper. We discussed, my initial proposal was just to extend the contract by a year. We discussed that was quite a tight deadline, and there needed to be time to think through what the options might be. And those options, we were very clear, might include bringing it in-house, might include working in partnership with other local authorities, might include still outsourcing, and might include still using the current service. And as I say, there were a lot of unanswered questions around why some of the other councils in Cambridgeshire hadn't stayed with the service, why some of them had taken it back in-house, whether those who'd taken it in-house might be open to providing a service to us. And the reason we wanted something to come to this meeting was precisely so that we were following a clear progression of what are our options, where do we want to go, what do we see. It wasn't just about re-tendering, or indeed we may not decide to re-tender. So I'm deeply disappointed that this committee has asked the chief executive to bring us a scoping paper, and what we've got instead is a paper that just says, oh, it's too soon to do anything. What I'm worried about is we're going to find ourselves back to square one, where we get presented with the option of extending the current contract or being without internal audit, which is exactly what we were trying to avoid. So I would like to change the recommendation so that it says, the report be noted and the chief executive bring an internal audit options paper to the committee. Sorry, that the report be noted and the chief executive bring an internal audit options paper to the committee in November 2022. So that's what I would like to change it for, because I think we need to be looking at the options so that there's then time for officers to go and look at the detail of which of those options we might want to look into further.
So that's an amendment. So anybody, do you have a second?
Well, a recommendation hasn't been proposed, so it's the recommendation.
Well, it's because it's noting, that's why. So yeah, so we haven't gone through that process.
But I'm seconding that.
Councillor John.
Yeah, if I can comment on that, I mean, the updating 4.2 talks about bringing something back or task deferred until 2023. To bring it in November 2022 is not that much further in, and we may decide at that meeting to ask for more information before we make a decision. So I'm not against that proposal. Certainly, I think it's not unreasonable. It gives us about what, 4 months, and then, as I say,
Gives us another.
if we're going to be looking at this, probably ideally we should be looking at it at least probably a year before the contract finishes. So that's March 23.
Yeah.
So I think to have even if it's, we end up saying, oh, we need more information, I don't think it's unreasonable to have an initial look at it personally. So I would support that.
Yeah, I'm actually quite happy to support that, because I think that does give us a bit of time. But it also provides us with an opportunity to do it in this year, this current year, based on the fact that it was our suggestion that we did this in this year. So I would be happy to do that. Is that something we can take back and put on the forward agenda? It does say the chief executive will present the options paper in due course. So if we were to say in due course, take away in due course and put, no, that was the answer, and put November. So we need to have a vote on that. Okay, so all those in favour. Yeah, so all those in favour of doing that. Okay, fine, thank you. Probably only a few months before he was going to do it. So, yeah, let's focus the mind. Now agenda item 10 was corporate risk management update. And here again, we're being asked to note the corporate risk register as set out in the appendix. And this is actually Ian's paper. We have got a number of questions. So if you'd just like to present the paper, Ian. Is there anything you want to say on the paper?
No, thank you, Chair. I mean, the corporate risk register has been updated. There's been 2 meetings of the corporate risk group, and their recommendations are detailed in the papers in front of you. We also took away questions and comments raised at committee back in January and discussed those, and the group's view of those questions and comments are detailed as Appendix 3 of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we can have a look at the question. So item number 10. So Councillor Kane, you had questions, and I think so did you, Councillor Skip. So we go with you, Councillor Kane, this time.
Okay, thank you. I asked, because we've removed the specific risk around COVID-19, and I'm quite worried about that, because I rather feel that if things are not listed as a risk, they may not be well monitored, which is why I asked some questions around the figures, which I'm afraid rather confirm my concerns. So I asked what the level of COVID-19 infections and hospitalizations was in East Cambs, and the response I got is that this information isn't broken down by district. But I had a quick Google and discovered that on the government website, it does break some of it down by district. So the last week that they've published, which was the 9th to the 14th of July, there were 52 positive results in East Cambs. Now that's almost certainly an understatement, because of course many less people will now be testing, because the testing isn't free and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, it's an increase of 24% on the previous 7 days. Which I believe from memory was in turn an increase on the 7 days before that, which is not surprising, because nationally it's increasing and in Cambridgeshire it's increasing. So people aren't getting as ill as they were. Not so many people are ending up in hospital, and not so many people are dying. Nevertheless, people are dying, people are ending up in hospital. And I think it is something that we still need to be aware of. So the other question I asked was about staff shortages as a result specifically of COVID. we haven't had the figures for ECSS because I wondered if that was part of the issues we've been having with collections. But for East Cams itself, it's 115 days have been lost just since the 1st of April this year. That's the equivalent of having roughly 1.5 people missing every day because of COVID. So I worry that it is it is an issue. Certainly we're finding at work that it's much more disruptive of work now than it was during peak pandemic, because the people who are getting it, although they're not getting seriously ill and going to hospital, they're ill enough not to be able to work. And also because more work is going to face, they're obviously staying at home rather than risking giving it to their colleagues. So I do worry that we've taken that risk out, because I suspect it is still an ongoing risk, and it's not just part of general business as usual. And I would like to ask the management group to review the decision to take it out.
Yeah, but can I just ask which policy committee does this go under then? Because it obviously it's covering all of the service.
Risk management comes under this audit committee.
Yes, I know, but I mean, the people who, yes, we look at the governance, don't we? We look at the procedures to make sure that our procedures are in place to do that. But actually the setting of the risk register is done by a policy group, isn't it? No? So
The risk register is produced by the corporate risk group on behalf of the management team and is presented to this committee for review.
So we can go back to the management group and ask, yeah. Okay, which is different for some of the other things that are done by service revenues. Oh, that's fine. I should know that. So that's fine. So we would. Anybody else want to make any comment on?
Some more questions, but
I know.
I think I'd just echo my experience as well as to what Councillor Kane has been saying, that I see sort of COVID absences in the workplace still a major issue, and it's only. If I go back to the 15th of June, more recently, the health announcements that the district council has been putting out on Twitter have been about the high temperatures, understandably. But on the 15th of June, the district council's account tweeted, "COVID is still with us. That's why it's important to remember these simple steps." And it goes on to tell you what action. So on one hand, we're recognising it as an authority, but then on the other, we seem to be removing it as a risk, which doesn't seem to line up.
We still have to report COVID illnesses, or is that no longer required? I mean, do we still report? At one time we reported how many COVID illnesses had, and I know in schools we don't report how many COVID illnesses, it's just illnesses now. So that's why I just wondered whether reporting has removed COVID from that was just internal. That's sharp. I've got a view. You haven't got a view. Sorry? Have you got a view?
No, not really at this stage.
Sorry?
Not really at this stage.
Okay. Well, I don't think there's any harm in going back and asking why this was taken out, and hearing what the reply could be, because I mean, one of the issues that we need to do is be abreast of different types of risks that are going to likely to occur or that are not really finished. So we're not told why that would have been removed, are we?
Yes, detailed.
It just says that has been removed, reviews its responses and recovery, and it's now operating under business as usual, i.e. we're not reflecting COVID as being an issue of illness. That's what that says. That's what that means, isn't it? Yeah. That it's not COVID that's a high risk, it's just illness in itself.
As we've done at previous committees and then the risk management group, I'm happy to take away all comments from members, including obviously this one, and we will discuss it at the next meeting of the risk group, and in the same way to be presented Appendix 3 on the report you've got in front of you, we can do similar on the next risk report detailing why the group well, either amend the risk register or
Yeah.
provide further
I think
details
if
of why we believe it's
Would you like to do that?
not necessary to be on the list any further.
Yeah. Okay, if that could be minuted, that we're going to do that. It'll be interesting to sit to look at figures in 6 months' time as to what's actually happening. If he goes away, that's great, isn't it? But yeah. Monkey fluence. Next question. Sorry.
So I asked in how many of each of the last financial years ECTC had delivered on their business plan. And I got a curious answer. It just said they continue to deliver on and have done for each year. My memory is that each year they have actually not delivered by the end of the year what they said they were going to deliver in their business plan. And that seems to be confirmed by an answer I got to, I was asking how their business plan for this current financial year could be a key control when it wasn't presented to Finance and Assets until June. And the shareholder meeting had to be cancelled due to the lack of a business plan. And of course has been cancelled again due to lack of directors and the Section 151 officer being available to attend. Anyway, the answer I got to that was that because the business plan for 2022-23 wasn't approved until June 2022, ECTC did not conduct any new business. So what we're being told is that for pretty much the first quarter of the year, ECTC didn't do any new business. So I don't see how the business plan is a control. It seems to be a real problem if the business cannot do anything new for its first quarter. And then even more curiously, that it continued to work under the 2021-22 business plan. Well, that business plan were things they were supposed to deliver by the 31st of March. So this seems to be saying that for the first quarter of this financial year, they were still trying to catch up on things they should have done in the previous financial year. So this isn't the place to discuss the ifs and buts in detail. What I'm really getting at here is I just don't see how this can be a key control. I just don't see how it can be said to be working.
Well, I think this is one of those issues that belongs to F&A committee, isn't it? Because this is policy, this is operational. So I think this needs to be referred back to F&A. This is not sort of from the government's perspective. So it would be interesting to hear. This is going back to, we have no response from F&A. It just hasn't continued. So we have our own members on F&A. Do we? Not from here, of course, we don't. Of course we don't. Not like operational where we've got 2 of our members on it. So.
But Chair, this is a key control of the risk, and I can't see how that control is operating if the business plan wasn't in place for the first quarter, and if they were, and if business plans just sort of keep rolling for the next quarter of the first quarter of the next year. I just don't see how that's an operational control.
This is not something that generally is reported. Ian, you're going to answer that.
As with your previous comments, Councillor Kane, again, happy to take this away and discuss it at the risk group and come up with a view of the risk group of how to move this forward.
I asked about how the shareholder arrangements are working because we haven't yet had our shareholder meeting of the full council. That was initially arranged for earlier this year. It had to be postponed because there wasn't a business plan. it then had to be cancelled because the relevant people weren't going to be present. I don't understand how that shows the arrangements are working. To me, it shows that the arrangements are quite clearly not working.
But the shareholders answer to obviously the company. So it's a question of the company's position in dealing with this. Yeah.
The company obviously
It's responsible for the shareholders.
no, the shareholders are able to ask the company what actions are being taken. You know, clearly the date of the shareholder meeting is being arranged at the moment, but from an audit committee's perspective, I've answered the question that we'll go away with the comments made and we will discuss them and provide you feedback on the risk management group's.
I mean, at the risk of asking a question rather than just listening, Councillor Inskip and I are both on operational services, which is the opportunity we have because two of the shareholder activities are within those 4 activities that we have as a policy committee. Do you feel that we have the appropriate opportunity to look at it from the operational perspective, because you and I are the only ones who are on a policy committee rather than others, because there's no F&A representatives from councillors there, but we are operational. So and there are 2 shareholder opportunities there for us to question. Do you feel that works from the operational perspective, not the governance, because we're governance and that's where the operational perspective.
But we don't have at that meeting any of the directors of the company to question. And in fact, at the last operational services meeting, where there was a major problem with the delivery of the service, we didn't even have the manager who oversaw that present in the committee. So it wasn't just failing on the governance side, it was, in terms of shareholder meetings being delayed, but we didn't actually have appropriate officer representation to answer the questions that we had at that committee on an operational basis.
Right, Councillor Kay.
Sorry, Chair, I thought the all council shareholder meeting was part of the shareholder arrangements.
Say that again, sorry.
I thought the all council shareholder meeting,
yes,
where we can all attend and the directors attend, I thought that was part of the shareholder arrangements.
That is part of the shareholders, which is run by the company.
And that hasn't happened. So I don't see how we can say that those controls are operating.
Are we able to ask when that shareholder meeting will be?
I mean, it was supposed to be Thursday this week, but it's obviously been cancelled and we're trying to get a new date set up, but we're not party to how those discussions are going to find a new date.
Yeah. I think from the auditor's perspective, we can consider that meeting is a crucial meeting for the company working with us as the main shareholder. Any more?
Well, I've got a lot, but I don't suppose we all want to be here all night. So I'll perhaps pick one thing that I think is symptomatic of the problems I'm seeing here. We've been talking about the risk appetite since we first started looking at the risk register and trying to understand why it's 15 and whether 15 is right. So we had quite a long discussion of it at the last meeting, and we asked a question. And the answer we got is the council has had a risk appetite of 15 for some while. Officers continue to believe that this is the right level at which risks with a residual score higher than this should be reported onto full council. That's not answering our question. That's just saying it's always been like this and we can't really see any reason to change it. What we were asking is what is the rationale behind it? And this to me is symptomatic of the problem I am finding with how this committee operates. We're not allowed to have the members of this group at the meeting so that we can have a proper discussion with them. We have questions taken back and we have frankly inadequate answers brought back to this committee. And I'm really very angry about this because the risk register is an important part of our role, making sure that this properly operates. And we only have to look, frankly, at what's going on with the whole refuse debacle. We certainly had at least public indications that there was a problem last autumn. And our risk register doesn't seem to have helped us in any way to spot what was going on, to do something about it. And now we're still saying in our risk register that there is no significant risk of, what are we saying? Let me find it, the exact thing. We're saying that the likelihood is only 3, which is, it's possible that there might be poor performance by the companies and that they might fail to deliver on expected levels of performance. It's not possible, it's happening. It's happening day after day, week after week. And this risk register is saying it's possible. And it just clearly isn't working. And I would like, well, I would like, but I'm not going to get, I would like the whole risk group to come to this meeting so we can have a proper, rational discussion about the risk register. But because I'm not going to get that, as a second best, I would like a proper paper that properly outlines the reason that we currently have a risk appetite of 15 and what the alternative options are. Because if you look at a risk appetite of 15, what we are genuinely saying, and I disagree with this, I am not happy with this, but we are saying it's okay for it to be possible that a person dies because of something this council does. And it's okay to be very likely that an employee has significant minor injuries and or an individual suffers mistreatment or abuse. I don't think that is acceptable. I think if we're doing something that has that level of risk, it should be going through the escalation process to corporate management team, audit committee and council, so that we fully understand why we're still doing that activity and why there really aren't any further mitigations that we can put in place to reduce the risk. And I'm getting frustrated with saying this at every meeting and just getting told, well, it's always been like this and we believe it's still okay. This isn't okay. It's not okay. And in fact, arithmetically, you're very unlikely to get anything that hits 16. There are only 4 mathematical probabilities: likely with high impact, likely with very high impact, highly likely with high impact, or highly likely with very high impact. Those are the only things that can possibly get to a 16. So I don't think 15 is the right figure. I don't think that, it's not my risk appetite, and I don't think it should be this council's risk appetite. And I feel like a broken record because I've said this at pretty much every meeting that the risk register has come up. And I feel that I'm being completely ignored by the risk management group. And I just don't see what value we're adding if we say we think something should be reviewed and we just get told it's been like this for ages and we believe it's still okay. That's just rude, frankly.
I appreciate that. I don't know enough about risk management, I have to say, to be an expert on this. But I would be interested, well, Ian, we're going to respond. There must be a rationale for the 15 that the risk management group comes up with. Has that been explained to us? Is it possible to explain it to us?
Firstly, I chair the corporate risk group, and so therefore I am responsible for feeding back to this committee the discussions that took place at that group. And I feel no need for other members of that group to attend this meeting. As I say, I'm chair and I'm more than capable of providing that feedback.
Okay.
Secondly, as detailed in this paper, the corporate risk group have considered the risk appetite, and the risk appetite has to be a judgment. There's no scientific way of calculating what the risk appetite should be. It has to be a judgment, and it remains the case that the corporate risk group judgment is that 15 is an appropriate score.
So the risk management group is basically saying it is okay for it to be possible for the council to be carrying out an activity where it's possible that a person dies. And they're saying it's okay for us to be carrying out an activity where it's possible that an employee has significant minor injuries and or an individual suffers mistreatment or abuse. That's okay. That's what the risk management group considers okay, acceptable within our risk appetite.
As I've commented on previous comments you've made, Councillor Kane, I will consider, or we'll take that back to the risk management group and consider it as we have done previously. Can I also just add that you mentioned you had a number of other questions. If you want to share those with me away from the meeting, I'm happy to also discuss those at the corporate risk group to provide feedback at a further future meeting.
Well, Chair, I only have a certain amount of time in the day, and I'm not getting what I consider to be acceptable answers. So anyway, I feel
think we take what Ian's just offered to do that, to take that back and to.
Well,
I think that would be helpful, and I think we would like you to do that, and that will go some way towards.
No, it honestly it won't. What I think we have to have is we have to have a discussion at this meeting with all of the risk management group so that we can understand the frankly confusing decisions that they take.
But our role is governance. So our role is to determine that the procedures we've got in place are the right procedures to get the responses that we need. Are we saying then that we don't have the confidence of our officers to actually do that procedure? Because that would be quite a serious thing to say.
By now, after a year of asking the same question and getting the same non-answers, I don't have that confidence now.
So if we go back to what you offered about the 15, let's start with that, and let's have the answer to that, and then we can look at it from that perspective.
So we're going to have a paper, are we, about?
Are you going to email round, or how are you going to do that, Ian, which will be the best way? It's not a long.
In the same way as you've got Appendix 3 in today's report on risk management, I will produce a similar appendix to the next risk management report that comes to.
Well, that's 6 months, isn't it?
That isn't sufficient. As he says in this, we could change the score. It's within our remit. So it's within our remit to set that appetite. I don't think the appetite is right. So I want to see a paper that sets out the options, scopes out the options and the pros and cons of setting a different appetite so that we can decide what the risk appetite should be.
So this is your perspective. I don't know whether anybody else would like to make a comment about that, because obviously you're one individual and there's 5 of us technically, although we're one down. Councillor Sharp? Not putting you on the spot.
Yes, I'm trying to assimilate this. I mean,
this is a committee process that we're going through here.
Yeah, it's a question for Ian, I suppose. The risk management group, they set the risk appetite at 15. That's their role. So yeah. So I mean, it's not unreasonable to have a paper from the risk management group, certainly setting out why they think that is appropriate, and we can then sort of discuss issues around that, because I take the point about I'm sure we'd all come up with different numbers if we did it, but that there are, obviously we've had the situation with the waste disposal, and it possibly does seem a bit low on because of the occurrences we've had.
Yes.
But as I understand it, it is not for this committee. That would be for operational services to change that.
Sorry?
Would that be for operational services to question that? Or, I mean, obviously we've got a role to question it, but
Yes.
would operational services also be undertaking that as well as the service committee?
Well, certainly that information is passed down to them. So
Yeah. I mean, they presumably get a paper from time to time on risk management.
I
No.
don't think they see this registered.
No, this is our risk management. This is ours. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
So taking Alan's point, and
In which case, sorry, to finish off then, yes, we
sorry.
should be. I think we should be. If we should get a paper on in terms of the appropriateness of the risk register of risk of 15. Yeah.
Well, to be frank, I've given up asking because I asked at the first meeting of this committee last year, and I've asked at least 3 times, I think, in total. And you know, when you make a judgment, you need to be able to provide some reasoning behind why you've made that judgment. Otherwise, it just looks like you plucked a number out of the air, or you've gone with what you've always used. And I think it would be, as an absolute minimum, we should have a paper that explains what the basis of that judgment is, because we haven't had that answered.
Okay, so we take your thank you very much for offering to take that paper, and we'll have that. Now, when is that going to come to us? Because you were saying you're going to attach it, so that's every 6 months if we get the paper on the corporate register, isn't it? Can we have that before?
I mean, clearly it's a committee's decision what they choose to request from officers. I would normally wish to bring this with the next risk paper to committee, which would be in 6 months' time, but obviously it's up to committees to make that decision. I mean, just on specifically, I mean, we've touched on 2 issues there. We've talked on the risk appetite score of 15, and we've also talked about the issues in waste. Now, the issues in waste are a service issue and relate to the service plan of waste, which goes to Operational Services Committee, and they will be providing that update on service delivery as part of that process. The risk which we've got in the risk register is more about the corporate governance of the waste service, not the individual day-to-day issues they may or may not be having with service delivery.
But we're not asking for that on the paper, or we were asking for how that 15 is made up from your decision-making process. We're not specifically on waste at all here. So if it's the principle of the governance approach, I think. Yes. You said you'd only got one, Councillor Kane.
Sorry.
So you picked one.
When I looked at the risk for A2, and I asked why the impact was not high, given that it's, well, indeed very high, given that the amount of money is more than £500,000, which is a very high impact. And I was told that because of the ongoing monitoring, it's considered extremely unlikely that the full value of the loan would ever be lost. Now that worried me, because the whole point of a risk register is you have a quantification of the likelihood and a quantification of the impact. You can't say that we think the risk is unlikely, and therefore, even though the impact qualifies for our very high, we're going to reduce it. That's what the multiplier is for. You have the like the impact times the likelihood. You can't reduce the impact just because you've decided the likelihood is low. That's where your multiple comes in. The fact is, we say on a financial basis, anything with an impact of more than £500,000 is a very high impact. We have significantly more than £500,000 invested in ECTC, and therefore the impact must be very high. It's just a simple mathematical thing. I don't see where judgment comes into that. And it worries me how many other impacts are not shown at the right figure, because the risk management group have mistakenly reduced them by using the likelihood. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
Can I refer Councillor Kane to the second page of Appendix 3, where it talks about risk A2 and the reasons for the score chosen.
And your answer is the loan is more than this amount, but it's considered extremely unlikely that the full value of the loan would ever be lost. That's muddling likelihood and impact.
But the trading company has a significant amount of assets, which would clearly be available to the council amongst its other creditors to pay off any outstanding amounts if the company was to disband. And so therefore those assets, I believe, therefore means the potential loss is reduced to the value quoted.
So what you're now saying is that the amount the council has at risk is reduced by the value of the assets the company has, which you're assuming would be at the value on the balance sheet if the company was in financial difficulties.
If there's on the value on the balance sheet, there would be no financial loss at all. So even taking that into account, you know, clearly I have a view of the balance sheet, and that is the monitoring which I'm talking about.
But if a company is in financial difficulties, what usually happens to the value of its assets?
I think this is a discussion that is too detailed to actually do in this meeting. So
It's a different answer to the one I was given anyway.
Yeah.
But the one I was given worried me, because it is effectively suggesting that the group isn't properly separating out likelihood and impact. And that's why I say again, I really don't think we can properly review this, properly reassure ourselves on this without having the whole group attend a meeting.
okay, I appreciate what you said, and we've minuted that. So if we could now move on. So we are requested to note the corporate risk registers.
Chair, I had questions.
Sorry?
I had questions that I'd like to follow
sorry.
up on.
So you did. I beg your pardon.
I'm sorry to go back over the A2 and waste again, but I think it's important because I asked what the performance was like over the past quarter, because again it comes back to the risk talks about failure to deliver upon business plans and expected level of performance of the two trading companies. Now we don't have the data, and the answer there doesn't give me the data for the last quarter, but I think the answer is all around us, as we've seen wheelie bins and black bags sitting on streets for days at a time, uncollected. But if I go back to December, we know then that there was a decision to suspend the green waste collection service. So we know that then there was a failure to deliver the agreed level of performance. We know at the last Operational Services Committee that looked back at the performance between the 1st of January and the 31st of March. The waste collection figure was based on the removal of those green bin collections, but if you removed that and looked against the original performance, that failed to meet its target in terms of collections completed. Successful completion of bin deliveries for this is replacements and new bins had a target of 92%, it was 68%. Waste recycling was 49% against a target of 59%. Street cleansing was even worse. So
but just excuse me, we are talking about how we do things.
yeah, exactly, yeah, and I'm explaining exactly that.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
absolutely, and that's really important. Yeah. So street cleansing 62% against 95%. Successful removal of fly tipped waste within 2 working days, 61% against 98%. So we had the issue in December. We had the report that showed the data for the quarter from January to March, and we know that failed to meet its target. We know anecdotally, without the data, that there was a failure to meet the target in the last quarter. Now, if we look at causes against that risk, it talks about poor performance by the companies with a lack of challenge and oversight, and a failure to embed effective governance arrangements and segregation of duty. Now, we know that it's only been in the last few weeks that we've had reports as the chief executive has become involved in terms of addressing the waste issues. We know that we haven't had a shareholder meeting where we as councillors could talk to the directors about the actions that they've been taken. So there's plenty of evidence that and again, if you look at what we've seen of the minutes of the directors' meetings, there isn't. We can't see that level of challenge against these service problems that have been there for over 6 months now. So you know, that process doesn't look like it's been working.
So could I just ask you?
And let me give another example.
Yeah, but if I could just say, because obviously from our perspective,
so that was a clear governance failure.
Risk register, not the operational activities.
So what I'm saying is we've got a risk, yes, a risk with a likelihood of 3, and yet we know as a fact that these things have happened. So we know. Let me finish speaking, and then you can speak afterwards. Okay. But I would like, Chair, you to explain what, and I'll let me finish, but I'd like you to explain whether you're comfortable with a risk rated as 3 when we know there has been 100% probability of failure because it's actually happened. It's been an issue, not a risk. It's been a long-standing issue. We had that lack of challenge. To give another example, let me just give another example.
I don't want to go to the 5-minute rule, but if I could
no, but you keep interrupting me, Chair. You should let me speak for 5 minutes and then you can say my time is up. So I'm quite happy to stick to the 5-minute rule, but I prefer not to be interrupted. I know we want to try and kick this under the long grass, but this is a real issue that is affecting residents every day. We should have been using our risk register to try and preempt that, but we haven't. Let me give another example. So the agreement to suspend the green waste collection, there was a freedom of information request asking for minutes of the meeting that made that decision. So the agreement between the district council and the trading company, the response to that request was that there wasn't a minute of meeting, there was a verbal endorsement. Is that an appropriate governance mechanism? There are no endless examples of where the governance here is failing, and yet we have the CMT seem to be rating this as, you know, at most possible, but it's happened time and time again. Why have we got such a mismatch?
Can I pick up then for just where you've got to? So the question we are asking would be from the governance perspective, to go back to the group and explain to us what the risk there is and how they've reached it. That's our role, isn't it? Because whether the appropriate procedure, not what actually happened on the ground operation, because that's operational, but from the risk point of view, from the governance point of view, we have to be sure that we have the right activities in place to come up with the right risk register assessment. So are you saying that we would go back to ask as to how they
I don't need to ask the question because the evidence is already there.
No, what we're saying, but
my question would be, why did they fail to rate this risk appropriately?
No, I think that if I could rephrase it, so how do they arrive at the figure?
No. Well, why did they fail to rate this appropriately? This is a clear failure to rate a risk appropriately. I think a risk that we know has been that has been a real issue for at least 6 months. If you believe what was in the EAL standard for longer, but at least 6 months.
Now you have had your 5 minutes, I'm pretty sure. So if we could just go back to because what we haven't had is a change in the risk register assessment from last time to this time. We would want to understand why, bearing in mind what's happened. That's how I see it. Might be wrong, but that's how I see it. So, and that's asking the question you're asking, but in a different way.
As with other comments, happy to take it back to the risk group, Chair.
I think we've always done this to death, if you'll pardon the expression.
I want to, I don't know whether it's an amendment or a new recommendation, but I'd like to read this out quickly and then I can read it out slowly for the minutes. But I'd like to propose that the report be noted and the finance manager bring a risk appetite options paper to the committee in November or October, whenever it is, 2022, for a review of the council's risk appetite, and that the risk management group create a separate risk for each of the 2 trading companies and review their assessment of likelihood and impact of the risks. Yeah,
I can probably give you a bit of
yeah, that the report be noted and little 1, the finance manager bring a risk appetite options paper to the committee in November, perhaps I should say to the next meeting, for a review of the council's risk appetite, which we've agreed. And little 2, the risk management group create a separate risk for each of the 2 trading companies and review their assessment of likelihood and impact of the risks.
second. I think we need a second. Councillor Inskip.
Yes, I'll second.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Yeah, if I can comment on that. I think we have spoken about this risk appetite of 15, and I don't think it's unreasonable to get a paper to try and understand why it is 15. And similarly, I'm going to support the risks of ECTC and ECSS are different, or they can be different because they're different companies and different industries, different businesses. So to put them on one line, I'm not against which is, I think, what effectively Councillor Kane is suggesting, is that we have two lines for that. Instead of one, lumping them all together, we have two. So, and as I say,
the risk assessments are shown separately. And
there should, because the risk of the trading company is, is building houses basically, and then the risk of the ECS is waste. So I'm not against actually, because there's got to be differences of likelihood, or which I'm sure, I would imagine the risk management group would actually go through that anyway, because they would be aware of those. So I don't think it's probably asking for much more than is internally done at the moment. I would think anyway. Ian might disagree with that, I don't know. But
Ian would like to respond.
I think we need to be clear what the risk in A2 is trying to identify. The risk in A2 is about the governance of the companies. It's not about their service delivery, it's about the governance. The governance of both the trading companies is the same, and so therefore it is appropriate they are in one risk. The service delivery of those two companies are picked up by the respective policy committee, and so therefore is very much different to what is detailed in the risk register. And so therefore I do not believe that it's necessary to split those two risks.
Oh, sorry.
So can I just ask a question in response to that then? So
I was thinking.
Each of these risks is rated on impact, and impact is based on the, we have a financial reference to that. Is the financial impact of a governance failure at ECSS or the same as a governance failure at ECTC? And the reason I ask is ultimately our only sort of financial exchange with ECSS is the management fee that we pay. Whereas if I look at ECTC, let's say suddenly the house, there was I don't think it's going to happen, but let's say there was a massive collapse in the housing market. I think our financial exposure would be much bigger than the ECSS management fee.
And that's why the score of cost is at the 3, because that is the higher of the two figures which you've just referred to. But it doesn't change the fact that the governance of the two companies is the same.
Can I just ask, when you say the governance is the same, they are separate companies. What you're saying is that they're run in the same way.
Yeah.
And the shareholding principles are the same.
The shareholder committee.
But they're still two separate companies. Yeah. So we have responsibility for governance of each of those companies separately or together. At the moment you're saying we're concerned about the governance because they're the same, but they are, but the businesses that they have are different. Councillor Sharp, I think, did you come back on that? No.
Thank you, Chair. I would just remind us the risk description is East Cambridgeshire Trading Company and East Cambridgeshire Street Scene failed to deliver upon business plans and expected level of performance. The cause is poor performance by the companies with a lack of challenge and oversight, failure to embed effective governance arrangements and segregation of duties. So that's the cause, not the risk. The effect is failing to achieve corporate priorities and medium-term financial strategy and reputational risk. So these are pretty big and they're different for each of the companies. And actually, we just had that agreed by the finance manager when he said that the impact is different for the two companies. So because they've combined them, they put the larger one in here. He is confirming that they are two separate entities. It is two separate risks. And I feel very strongly that they should be separated.
Yes, it was touching on what I think it was Ian said. in terms of the performance, that goes back to the policy committees, although I think we agreed earlier that they don't have the risk, they don't own the risk register. So are we assuming that the performance is scrutinised, for want of a better word, through those committees by a paper going in terms of their performance? I'm trying to understand how the policy committees are formally scrutinising the workings of the two companies. But I do think the two companies are different. Personally, I understand what Ian's saying. He's saying it's the governance, although the wording in there does mention poor performance and not just governance arrangements. So it's mixing and matching. I certainly wouldn't be against splitting them out. I think it would make it more transparent as well. Sorry, to finish off.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Councillor Kane might disagree, but obviously we've had the issues with the waste. So at the moment, that's the likelihood is more on that maybe than I would think would be on ECTC. I know, so we may disagree over the markings, but so that's why I think one, you know, fits all for the two lines makes it a bit muddled.
Apart from having to do the work that does this, what difference does it make if we have those separate? Because we're dealing with the governance of two organisations instead of one, and we're dealing with them separately, which is what we do, but we're still dealing with the governance overall. Why would that be an issue? Or just haven't we done it?
Again, going back to the corporate risk group's position, their view is that because this risk is deemed to be governance and the governance is the same, then there's no need to split them out. Clearly, I'm happy to, as I have with all the comments this evening, take those back to the corporate risk group and we'll have another discussion about it.
Well, having listened to what everybody has said, I think I agree with that. Because then, if it doesn't change, it doesn't matter. But we've gone through that process of at least satisfying ourselves that what we're doing is what we're supposed to be doing as an audit committee. So I think we need to do that, if I may say. Okay.
We've got a motion.
I know, we've got a motion, we've got a seconder, and so we've got to go for, yeah, okay, I hadn't forgotten. Okay, so those in favour of the motion. Oh. For all of it.
Yeah, so we've got a little one that the report be noted and the finance manager bring a risk appetite options paper to the next meeting of the committee for a review of the council's risk appetite. That's a big one. And little two is the risk management group create a separate risk register for each of the two trading companies and review their assessment of the likelihood and impact of the risk.
And they might be identical.
Sorry, just a slight correction, it's just a separate risk.
Sorry, it's a separate risk, but yes, yeah,
So we go to the vote. All those in favour? Okay, that's carried. Sorry, that causes lots of work, Ian, and I apologise that, but I think in terms of transparency, from our benefit, I think it's the right thing to do. Right, agenda item number 11, which is to update the council's code of corporate governance, which hasn't been updated since 2017. So I hope you've had a chance to have a look at it. So Ian, if you'd just like to, this is an approval, so we'll be looking for a proposer and a seconder, and I'm happy to propose that from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp is prepared to second that. But first of all, can you go through the paper?
Yeah, as the chair has made in her introduction, the corporate governance report hadn't been looked at for a while, so we've gone through that, and management team have come up with the version now in front of you. I hope the fact that I'll have no questions on it means that you are comfortable with it, but we'll find out that in a minute. Thank you.
I don't think I've got any questions on that one. No? Does that mean everybody's happy? That's right. Okay, all those in favour? Right, okay. So, thank you. Agenda item number 12, we're asked to note the contents of this report. This was a report that members asked to come to the committee, which is the Financial Management Code. And again, that's Ian who's bringing that paper. It's just noting this paper. So Ian, if you could just introduce the paper.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, committee asked some while ago that we did a review of the Financial Management Code as can be seen, and it was agreed last year as part of the internal audit work programme. I asked internal audit to do a review, a more independent review than I potentially have done myself. So their report is attached, and I have in your cover report covered the areas where they have suggested that there are potential areas for improvement, and I've provided a narrative on each of those for you to say where the council is. Thank you.
Any comments on that? Sorry, Councillor Kane.
I don't have any follow-ups to my question. I'd like to thank the finance manager and everyone involved in doing this, because I think it's a useful report, and it's good to see that we've gone through and tested ourselves against SIPFA's code. I would like to suggest an amendment to the recommendation, because I note that we're going to be doing a survey on the adequacy of financial reports, and that we're going to be putting in place an action plan to improve the level of compliance. And I think it would be useful if this committee saw those. So I would like to add to the recommendation, ask that a report is brought to the next committee on the survey of the adequacy of financial reports and the action plan for improving the level of compliance with the FM code. Sorry. And ask that a report is brought to this committee, the next committee, on the survey on the adequacy of financial reports and the action plan.
So just asking for a follow-up here. Yeah.
For improving the level of compliance.
Yeah.
With the Financial Management Code.
Okay, do I have a second one? I just want to ask Ian how feasible it is all to get it all in the forward agenda. I need to have a look at that and see what, because we've loaded things in there now which we've not had, so I needed to look at that. So in view of everything, before we go into any kind of discussion, is that feasible to actually bring forward? I mean, in terms of workload and so on, with everything else that you've got going on, is it a big job for you?
I don't believe what has been asked for is that substantial piece of work, so I'm comfortable with that come back in the next meeting.
It's just it closes the loop. We know what we're doing and the reactions there. We can and then we can make sure that it's. Sorry.
Sorry, I don't think what has been asked for is actually that major piece of work, so I'm happy to bring it back to the next meeting.
It's just about saying what it was, saying what we need to do, and then checking that we've done it. Yes, is everybody happy with that? Yes, thank you, Ian. Thank you for being working with us on that, because this is really helpful. So now we do have to look at the agenda plan because, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I thought, yeah, so, yeah.
So I'll second that.
You seconded it. I think we all agreed it actually as we were going. So, but it does, now we are now changing and loading and your forward plan, which was obviously not for noting because it's all changed because we've asked to put certain things into that November meeting. I don't know whether you've got a list of what that was, Tracy, as we were going along, but it's.
All of that is now in one.
So.
In my notes, so that those then will be added on to the agenda plan. And it's a matter for yourselves now to decide what appropriate date is for that next meeting.
Well, it's suggested for the 28th of November. Ian suggested that we brought it forward to the 4th of October. 17th. Oh. So I don't, I mean, A, it depends on the logistics of doing that and B, on the availability of you to be able to pull together those papers in that time.
So just for members, just to a bit of context on that, clearly the date at the end of November was set based on the expectation we was going to have the external audit report, which obviously we're now not going to get. And so therefore simply to try and ensure the meetings are more balanced across the course of the year, that is suggested that we move it forward to the 17th of October.
That also means that papers have to be out another 7 days before that, which is the beginning of October. So it's about your workload. Is everybody available for the 17th? 17th of October instead of the 28th of November. Yeah, yeah. That's amazing that everybody's available to do that. So, so are we happy then to move it? And you're happy that you, okay. So, and you'll obviously put it out in the minutes what that's going to look like in terms of
obviously
what yeah.
We've got revised the amendments to the agenda plan here.
Yeah.
You've got the amendments to the agenda plan here. There'll be the additional items that have been agreed at this meeting.
Yeah.
And
all of the for the benefit if we've got any audience left today, so for the benefit of the residents that are watching, all the questions that have been asked will be put into the minutes so that you'll see what the original questions were, plus the minuted answers for additional questions. So that's the end of the meeting, nearly 7:15. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us if you have, and we hope you found it of interest. Thank you.